Good morning. Happy Friday and welcome back to Morning Coffee Live. Exciting. It's been a full week now. Did the first stream a week ago today, Monday through Friday. So very exciting. Would love any feedback. Anybody who watches live or in the comments, please throw in any feedback you might have. If there's anything you like to see me talk about, if you have any just general feedback for the concept or any ideas for things to talk about, if there's anything particular you're interested in, if you have any just general feedback, just love to hear your thoughts on how you think it's been going. It's been a interesting experience. The first day, it was really hard to push the go live button just because it's tough putting yourself out there into the world, if you will, on social media. And secondly, I chose to do a live format, which means I'm not taking the time to go back and edit these or cut out mistakes or bloopers. And it's not scripted, rehearsed. I have an idea of what I want to talk about, or in generally a bullet point or two on the topic, and then I've been just kind of going. That's predominantly my style. I do other stuff as well, but would love to hear what anyone has to think about it. Um, Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite topics. It's a huge topic, and I think it is one of the most overlooked skills there is. And I think it's one of the least taught skills there is, but very much one of the most valuable ones there is. And that is critical thinking. Critical thinking is not just going, okay, I thought about something, I made a decision. Critical thinking is a method of thinking, it's a process of thinking, it's a way of evaluating anything, any information. It's a way of evaluating information to come to the right conclusion, the right decision. How do you do that, you ask? Well, it's about having a framework. You should have a framework for critical thinking. Where I first truly learned, higher level of critical thinking, if you will, was actually during my time at San Jose State University during my undergrad. I had a professor there, Nick Zoffel, or as the people who didn't like him, and I never quite understood it, called him Awful Zoffel. He's a great teacher. Pedagogy was his big thing. He and I did not see on anything eye to eye. Um, when it came to politics, values, etc., worldviews, our paradigms were drastically different. But we had a great respect for each other, and I learned so much from him, and I think he even learned a thing or two from me. But he gave us a framework for critical thinking. How it worked out was actually in the first day of his class. We go through, we get our assignments, this and that. Day two, he assigns us a paper, our first paper of the year. This is, I think, a comms 101 course. Everyone goes home, we write the paper, come back, we deliver the paper the next week. And he returned every single paper to us without a grade. And he said, here's the deal. Every one of these papers deserves an F, but I didn't give you one. I'm going to give you an option instead. You can rewrite it, and I will provide you feedback. And then you can rewrite it again, and you can continue to rewrite until you get the grade you want on it. But then what he did was he taught us how to critically think. The reason our papers weren't any good is a bunch of people just throwing their opinion out on a sheet of paper. Well, he taught us that that's not what college level work is. That's not critical thinking. That's an opinion piece. To critically think, you need a framework. And so the framework he taught us, which is the one I predominantly use to this day, is paradigm methodol or paradigm epistemology, ontology, axiology, and methodology with a literature review. And that's a bunch of big words. And what it is philosophical frameworks. Paradigm is your worldview. Epistemology is your knowledge, your education. Ontology is your I always screw up ontology and epistemology. Ontology is your the nature of being in existence and your lived experience. Axiology is your morals, ethics, and belief system. And then Methodology is the methods you're using to analyze something, to think about it, and the limitations thereof. Those have to be included in the methodology. And then finally, the last piece is a literature review. And a literature review is basically whatever the topic is, reading, watching, listening to, whatever it may be, what other people have already talked about, written, etc., respected scholars on the topic. So you approach a new issue. You always start from your paradigm. That's your worldview. Say, okay, that's the highest level. The culmination of your life experience is your paradigm. Who you are, your first reaction when you look at something, your intrinsic reaction, your instinct is shaped by your paradigm. Your paradigm's your entire worldview. It's everything you are, everything you come to be put together. That's your paradigm. That's the first place to start when you want to evaluate a topic from a critical thinking approach. Just look at it from your worldview and say, okay, start making heads or tails of it, start building hypotheses. The very second thing you want to do is jump into your lit review. Don't put that to the end. Use the paradigm as like your introduction to your thought, the same way you would a paper. Then do your literature review. See what's been said on it. See what research there is on it. Go to, if you're almost every single issue you can imagine has published research articles on it. Go look those up. Get a good background. Understand how everyone else has already approached the problem. Are they for it? Are they against it? Is it up? Is it down? Is it left? Is it right? Why? Where's their disagreement? Where is there, generally consensus? Where are there areas that haven't been looked at yet? What are the areas that matter to you? You want to do a full literature review. Once you've done your literature review, you now take your concept, you take your paradigm that you've approached it from, you take that literature review, and you start building out your thought or your, how you want to write it. And how do you do that? Well, next you approach from the standpoint of epistemology. Epistemology is your education, it's your knowledge, it's how you've come to know them, is what epistemology is. In the case of critical thinking, where you really use it, is this is the application of your knowledge to the issue you're critically thinking about. Um, and so that's applying not just your, how you've learned things along the road knowledge, but it's also your formal education, what you've read in those books, how you apply that back to the issues based on the literature. So you have an issue, you take your stance on it, your position that you want to think about, you do your literature review, you see what others have done. Then you come to your ontology, or sorry, your epistemology, and you say, okay, what do I know about this from an educational standpoint, from a knowledge standpoint? And apply those principles and start looking at the issue that way, purely from a headspace way. Once you've done that and you've analyzed all sides of the argument, the issue from there, you then want to bring in your ontology, your lived world experience. You go, okay, where does this add up? Where does it not to my life experience? Not my worldview, but just my life experience. How have I seen this issue actually work in the world and whatever scenario it may be, and evaluate it from that standpoint, from your ontology. Then what you want to do is you want to evaluate from an axiological standpoint. Beliefs, values, morals. Very important when you're critically thinking about something. You want to think about how do your beliefs affect the way you think about this issue? Positively, negatively, etc. Where do they interfere? Where do they agree? Where do they disagree? Is there a hard stop? Is there a spot you can't cross due to your belief system, due to your values, due to your ethics? Very important to look at any issue you want to think about critically from a standpoint of beliefs. In today's society, we try to push belief to the side and say, no, you must focus on rational it's business. Well, when you're critically thinking, your belief systems are a part of that. Ethics and morals are a part of that. In the business world, ethics are, tantamount to, I mean, just about, they're one of the biggest things there are. If you're worried about the success of your company, ethics are just so incredibly important for functioning in society. You want to make sure you're evaluating from those standpoints. So now, once you've taken a look from an axiological standpoint and you've weighed your values, your ethics, your morals against it, you then want to look at a methodology. The methodology is what method, what scientific method, what informal method, what research method, whether it's qualitative or quantitative or anywhere in between, are you going to use to evaluate the issue critically? Well, that's something where people don't put enough thought into that one. I think in most cases they just go off the top of their head versus using a method to, using an actual methodology to analyze something. You want to test, you want to look at comparisons. You want to compare things back and forth. You want to know what the limitations of the method you're using. You want to know what the limitations of your paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology, and methodology are. You want to think about the limitations of the actual way you're analyzing and how those affect your conclusions. And limitations aren't a bad thing, they're a good thing. You just need to be upfront with them and make it clear when you are presenting something what are the weaknesses of the argument. So for example, if we take what I'm talking about here, my paradigm is I've been living in the marketing world for 20 years. Right. My epistemology, I have a master's degree in PR marketing and advertising. I have a bachelor's degree in communication studies. I did my undergrad in entrepreneurship, corporate crisis management. I've read almost every relevant book on most of the topics that we're looking at here. That's it. Now, I go, okay, so that's my paradigm, or sorry, my ep- epistemology. What's my ontology? Well, I've been working in this field for nearly 20 years. I've dealt with so many situations. I bring that to everything I look at, right? What about my axiology? Well, that's really about bringing in my values and ethics. For example, one of the big um, ones I have, and this is not an entirely legal thing, it's more of a personal ethic. I don't like marketing to children. Marketing to their parents, fine, but not to children. No one under the age of 18. Why is that? Well, the type of marketing I do, I use very large amounts of data that every adult has agreed to sharing. Whether they read the fine print or not, they agreed to it. So I have no problem using that. They've opted into it to market to them. Minors under the age of 18, one, cannot sign a legal document. So even if they did opt in, they technically weren't supposed to be able to. And two, are not, they don't have consent. They are minors. Therefore, I try to avoid targeting them in marketing because that data that I would use is not something they willfully gave with fully knowing and critically thinking about it first, right? So I bring in my axiology and my methodology. What's my methodology of critical thinking? Well, in most cases, it's just in my head, but it's something that takes time. You put a lot of thought power, a lot of brain power into it, analyzing issues from different ways, analyzing them as much as possible from both qualitative and quantitative standpoints. I mean, a lot of it depends on what it is you're critically thinking about. But every issue that you ever want to think about or you ever want to come up with a true strong opinion on, you want to critically think about it. And you always want to critically think with a framework. So the framework I use is paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology with a literature review. The literature review is making sure you're bringing in the other's opinions. I said when it's a thought experiment, that literature review might just be what you've heard about it, what people are saying about it, what's in the news. Oh, one where I use critical thinking a lot. Read the news. When you read news stories, first of all, in the news, about 70% or more of everything you ever read was written by PR people, not by journalists. So you have to start with that. And from a critical thinking standpoint, that's kind of a big deal. You want to understand as you're analyzing things and critically thinking, part of that review is the standpoint of the others who wrote it. What was their paradigm? What was their epistemology, their ontology, their axiology, their methodology? How does it line up? You want to be looking at all those things. And that's how you're going to be able to start making good decisions and start thinking critically. Use a framework. Once again, these are all topics I'm going to dive into a lot more deeply. I mean, each of those can, paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology, each of those can be, an hour plus of lecture, if you will. But the moral of the story is critical thinking is so important, dare I say, critically important to career, to life, to just, I mean, to everything. Anywhere where you're interacting with any kind of data, being able to critically think about it makes such a difference. Most people fail to do it. And don't kid yourself. You know, you probably do too. I know there's a lot of times I don't take the time to critically think about an issue. Critical thinking takes time. It is not an instantaneous thing. It's not something where you look at an issue and you just know the answer. To critically think, I said you have to take your time. You have to use a framework of some sort to do so. And what will it do for you? What's the results of critical thinking? Well, the results of critical thinking is that one is clarity. You just end up understanding so much more about things. And two, you'll stop being manipulated as much. In marketing, at the end of the day, our job's to manipulate people. And now I'm not using that word in a negative sense. I'm just meaning it quite literally as what it is. Getting someone to do something besides what they were intending to do. That's what marketing's all about. Everyone's trying to manipulate everybody constantly. The news is trying to manipulate you. Advertising is trying to manipulate you. Salespeople are trying to manipulate everything. Branding is about subconsciously manipulating people. Everyone's always trying to manipulate you. How do you protect yourself from that? Well, you think critically. You think critically. You put together a framework, and then you use that framework to analyze an issue to actually come to a result beyond one of just off the top of your head, but one with some serious thought behind it. And it also gives you defensible positions. When you critically think about an issue, you put more time and effort into it than most people do. You also have a good understanding, you know the limitations of your own knowledge and of the arguments. When you're equipped with all that, it also puts you in a much stronger position to be able to discuss and talk about these issues. Critical thinking should be applied to your work life. It should be applied to your personal life. It should be applied to politics. It should be applied to media, the news. It should be applied to your TV shows, your education. Apply it to your teachers and what they're teaching. It should be applied to every aspect of your life. Critical thinking is so important for your success and for understanding the world and for growing and building your own paradigm and making it stronger. Critical thinking is so incredibly important. And very few people take the time to actually do it. They just listen to what's been said to them, they absorb it, and they regurgitate it. That doesn't get you anywhere. Use your brain. And how do you do that? By critical thinking. My kids are 4 and 5. They could hear something on TV and spit it back out. That does not mean that they thought about it. Yet that's what you see most people doing. They hear, they speak, nothing in between. Critical thinking. Coming back to the foundation, we had that paper we were given by the teacher, Nick, my old friend Nick Zoffel there. Give us that paper. Everyone took the paper. Most of us rewrote it. I think everyone except for one person rewrote it the first time around. We turned it back in the next week and comes back to us again. Everybody failed. At this point, people are starting to get a little annoyed. Like, what's going on here? The second time he gave our paper back. Each week, as he gave our paper back, he taught us more about critical thinking, about paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology. And he then had a structure, he taught us how to structure our paper in that way, how to do our literature review, how to properly cite sources, how to use APA guidelines to cite things properly, how to do research, how to learn about an issue from the right sources and the right people so that we could make intelligent thoughts about it. By the time all was said and done, when we hit the end of the semester, there were only 12 of us left in the class. All 12 of us were still working on that first assignment, submitting it. And by the time we turned in the 12 of us remaining of the 35 or 45 that started originally. We had a fairly high attrition. Most people didn't like the fact that we had to keep rewriting the same paper. By the time we turned that paper in at the end of the semester, it was phenomenal. It was airtight. It was solid. It had a paradigm. It took our worldview and applied it to a topic in communication, and it laid it out how we saw it in an introduction and what we were hoping to do and hoping to achieve through the course of our paper. We then all had a literature review. That literature review was, 4, 5, 6 pages long of looking at other research on the topic that we were looking at for our paper. What did they said for it? What did they said against it? What were the limitations of their research? What were the questions discovered in prior research? Taking a look at all that and then saying, okay, based on the literature review and our paradigm, what are we going to focus on for our approach? Taking that approach and applying our epistemology to it, what we were learning in school, what we knew from books, applying that to the paper, our ontology, our life experience, how does that tie in? Our lived experience, what we had seen firsthand, tying that into our topics. Then we wrote our axiology. We brought our values, our ethics, our belief systems in, applied those to the topic. Wrote our methodology, how we were going to look at our topic, how we were analyzing it, how we were checking it, what's the limitations of our methods, and then finally a conclusion or a results section. In the results section, where we said, here's what we've learned based on our methodology, paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology. Here's what we've learned. Here's what we've put together. Here's the limitations of that. Here's that body of knowledge. Here's the new addition, my critical thought, my new addition to the body of work on this issue is here. It's the results section. And then finally, a conclusion. The conclusion just resumming what we did, going back to the topic, and all said and done, the 12 of us who finished that course had written one paper successfully. I guarantee you, for all 12 of us, it was the best paper we had ever written individually. And the reason being is it was the first time any of us had put serious critical thinking skills to work in writing a paper. This was a paper for a Com 101 course. It was a life changing paper. That one paper turned into an entire semester's education on critical thinking and writing. And really, the whole semester was focused around paradigm, epistemology, ontology, axiology, methodology, making sure to include a literature review. I would argue it was one of the most valuable courses I ever took in my college career. And mind you, I started out as a computer science major. I then went from there into communication studies, had to redo, a whole, basically, year and a half of coursework to do that switch. I minored in corporate crisis management because the first graduate level course in corporate crisis management was the third ever course in the U.S. in corporate crisis management. First on the West Coast, was offered in my undergrad years, and I got allowed to take the course, and it was incredible. So I went to corporate crisis management. I put together a minor around that, taking business ethics, entrepreneurship, mass media, and corporate crisis management and mediation, and combined them into a minor, if you will. Um, Took all this stuff though together. That class was probably the most valuable, and the teacher of that course, Nick Zoffel, haven't talked to him in about 15 years now. I've reached out to him a couple times on LinkedIn. I haven't got a hold of him. Nick, if you ever happen to see this video, reach out. Love to say hi. Or Nick's in California. If you're still out there, grab a cup of coffee. But I followed him through my education. Took a number of courses with him. Tell you the story sometime about how hopefully get him on the show to tell the story about the time he threw the chair and the horrors of that example. Um, well, the stuff I'll talk about communication in general from a theoretical standpoint is founded in knowledge I gained from him and his courses. So, just a huge shout out to Nick Zoffel, one of the greatest professors I ever had. My illustrious, rather long college career. There's only about five professors that really left a mark. 4 or 5 professors that left a real mark. Of him, I would say he was probably the number one. So, Nick, if you're out there, huge shout out to you. Thank you so much for everything you ever taught me. But yeah, there's a quick introduction to critical thinking and a framework that any of you can use for critical thinking. If you want to learn more about that framework or more on the topic, please let me know in the comments or reach out. Happy to talk more about it. But use critical thinking, put it to test in everything you do. When you read the news, when you see an article, when you see something on social media, hell, what I just talked about, use the framework, analyze it. Stop making decisions and stop thinking emotionally. Think critically. There is room for emotion in critical thinking. It falls under the ontology section frequently with your lived experience, and it can also fall under your axiology if you have very strong feelings on a subject. But those feelings, when it comes to a critical thinking standpoint, should be analyzed as well as another data point. When you are critically thinking, it is about logic, rationality, and a philosophical framework to guide the thought and ensure the framework's really for you to ensure you've thought about something fully and knowing that you can stand by your own conclusions because you've thought them through. Emotion is not a successful strategy. Rationality, logic, and critical thinking is. Well, happy Friday, everyone. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. I don't have any big plans this weekend other than sit around and spend time with the wife and kids and probably do a little writing for my next white paper. But if anyone has any great plans for the weekend, feel free to share those in the chat as well. Would love to hear about them. And yeah, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. God bless, and I will talk to you on Monday.